All right, so here it is. Getting ready to wrap the brisket. What I use is butcher paper. I like butcher paper a lot. This pink butcher paper is made specifically for smoking meats. Now the reason why I like butcher paper is it's a good way to wrap the meat. You can kind of help it through the stall a little bit, but you can also really just keep the juices preserved inside the meat without ruining the bark. I find that butcher paper allows the meat to breathe just a little bit and allows the bark to not become saturated with juice and to soften, which is, you kind of like if you wanted to use foil, for instance, foil would give you that effect. You would have, it would give it almost like a pot roast kind of a texture, like you've been cooking in a slow cooker for hours. To me, when you're smoking meat, when you're making barbecue, the whole goal is to create that bark, and we don't want to ruin that bark with the wrap. So for me, I don't like to use foil for that purpose. You can use it if you want to. If you want a soft, spongy texture, like go for the foil. You'll get that, and it'll work out great for you. But if you're like me and you want the bark and you want that texture, you really need to just go with butcher paper. Or if you don't want to wrap it, you don't have to wrap it at all. It will kind of dry the meat out a little bit. It will take longer to get through the stall. You may have to bump your temperatures up even a little bit more, but you can certainly do that also. So not really a right or a wrong. It's more a matter of preference, and I'm just trying to explain to you the different options and what to expect from going the different paths. So for me, what I like to do is I like to use cider vinegar again. But again, back to the butcher paper real quick. I have 2 pieces of butcher paper. I just you try to make it long enough so that you can roll your brisket, 3-4 times in the paper. But I use two pieces to make sure that it's plenty long to fold over and cover the front of the brisket plenty well. So first we'll start with just some cider vinegar. And what I do is I just pretty much, I don't drench the butcher paper, but I get it plenty damp, plenty wet. This is our last chance to really see the brisket and keep it from drying out and to keep it nice and moist. Again, the acid in the cider vinegar is going to really help to break down the collagen and the proteins and keep the meat moist and promote it to be moist. So I always kind of wet the paper with that. I find it's just very helpful keeping the meat moist, not letting it dry out even while it's wrapped. Then what I like to do is just take some beef tallow. I don't always do this, but I decided to do it today. But just kind of where I'm going to lay the brisket at, just kind of squirt some tallow there. It doesn't take a ton of it, but wrapping it in beef tallow I find really helps with the tenderness and the juiciness of the meat. You wrap it in that tallow, it gets on the outside of the meat, really kind of doesn't soften or moisten the bark or the brisket, but it definitely makes it juicy and preserves that juiciness that we're trying to keep inside the meat. This eventually seems to kind of work into the meat and really help it to be juicy, but also it helps to give like that shiny sparkle, not a sparkle, but more of like a shiny appearance to the brisket when you unwrap it, where it's like the light reflects off of it and it just looks really, really great, really, really awesome. So beef tallow, it's one of those little secrets that you can do. Don't have to do it. I don't always do it, but I do it as often as I can. So now I'm going to go ahead and use my trusty barbecue gloves, and we're going to pull the meat off the smoker, bring it inside it, and wrap it. So I don't ever use tongs to pull my meat off of the smoker. I always use gloves or my hands. I try to be as careful as I can to not ruin any of the bark that we're creating. I feel like tongs will ruin it. So picking it up with your hands, using gloves, using a towel, whatever, really helps to preserve that bark and to make it nice and keep it all together. We don't want to break it up or have tong marks or anything like that on our meat. So I always definitely try to avoid that as well. So be right back with the meat, and then we'll go ahead and start wrapping. Okay, so here it is. Man, this thing just looks so awesome. Nice dark black bark, just the way that we want it. Again, no puddling on the flat, which happens a lot of times if you don't trim properly. Get that puddling, so we avoided that. Which really helps that bark to form and just make it really, really great and really, really good. Gonna go ahead and pull the meat probe out. So, that's a little hot. One thing I will say that it's kind of a rub for me with the meter probes that I have found is that you can't keep them in the meat when you after you wrap it. Like, I can't leave this in the meat and then wrap over it. Once I wrap the meat, it's actually going to lose connection with the meter block, and I'll stop being able to get a signal from the probe, which I just don't like about it, but it's just the way it is. So I have to take it out and then wrap it. And unfortunately, I do have to put it back in, but I found it's not really a big deal. I've never really seen or noticed any issues from that in my own personal experience. But we'll just kind of fold this over like that. Get it so it's just nice and tight with the meat. Drag it down here. Give us some space. And I just fold it over. Fold it over like so. Again, trying to make it so it's just nice and tight up against the meat. Don't want any air pockets. Just want to really seal it all in. But at the same time, I don't want to rip the paper, of course. So I'm going to do our best to avoid that. So here it is. And I definitely want it to end so that the top is on top after I'm done wrapping it as well. So go ahead and go over one more time, and then one more time. And then if you want, you can always trim up any of these little pieces here if you're ever concerned that they're going to burn up or whatever. You can always trim up any loose pieces with some scissors. This time I didn't have to. Hooray. So, and then here, put the meter probe back in. So I always kind of like hold the meter probe kind of like where I'm going to put it. Get a good visual of where I need to stop on the meter probe to get to where I want it to be. And then just stick it back in. Again, the meter probe, not going to be used to tell us when this is done. Purely going to be used to let us know when it's time to start checking it and to monitor the progress of it, make sure it's coming along like it should. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back on the smoker and pretty much just going to leave it in there until it's time to check it for done. I'll bump the temp up to 275 now, kind of push this thing through the stall, get it going, get it all the way to the finish. One thing I did want to mention about the stall, and I find at elevation where the water, is going to boil faster, and at elevation where the water is going to boil faster, where the fire doesn't burn as efficient as it does at lower elevations. You don't really want to keep your meat in the stall for too long. I find, a half hour at max is where I want to wait, give it before I start bumping the temp up to really kind of push it through the stall quickly. Quicker you can get it through the stall, the more water you can keep in the actual meat itself. At elevation, it seems to be better. It makes it so that it doesn't dry out as quickly. Makes it so when you start pushing that temp up to that, 204 degree mark, which for me, my elevation, the boiling point is 204.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So I want to make sure that I keep as much water retention inside the meat to keep it from evaporating and frankly drying out. So pushing it through the stall a little bit faster I find really helps, really benefits the meat and the overall end product. So keep that in mind when you're cooking, and factor in your elevation and how quickly the water is going to start to dissipate from the meat. Make sure that you're accounting for that, and that you're not letting your meat just sit in the stall and push all the juices and all the moisture and all the water out of it longer than it needs to. So gonna go and get this back on the cooker now. I don't want it to cool off too much. And then, so something I wanted to address really quickly, now that I've got the brisket back in the smoker, something that I get asked a lot is why do you even put the meat back in the smoker after it's wrapped? Like, once it's wrapped, doesn't it stop taking on the smoke flavor that you're trying to create from having in the smoker? Like, why not just throw it back in the oven? For me, my experience, I have found that changing the heat source, especially on something like as sensitive as a brisket, which brisket is not, it's really easy to screw up. It's one of those meats that it's definitely on the as far as like if there was a difficulty scale for smoking meats, like brisket's definitely at the top of that scale as far as difficulty goes. And it's very sensitive, and it's very easy to screw up. Like I mentioned before, you want to have consistent temps so that you're not opening and closing those pores. I feel like that's kind of the same thing putting it in an oven. And in my experience, putting it in an oven, even if you put it in there like 225, 250, 275, whatever you want to put it at, you're changing your heat source. You're going from indirect heat in the smoker to direct heat in the oven. That direct heat is going to change the way the meat is warming. It's not going to necessarily warm from air flowing over the top of it. It's going to warm from the bottom up, and it's going to potentially dry it out. You're going to lose some juices. You're going to potentially make your meat be a little bit more soggy than it should be. Definitely won't be as juicy as what it should be. These are just kind of the things that I found putting it in an oven as opposed to just putting it back on the smoker. I get it. Oven's easier. Maybe you're running out of wood, running out of pellets. You don't have a choice. I wouldn't ever recommend it, but I guess it's okay. The meat, at the end of the day, it'll probably be okay. It's fine. Just as long as you're willing to, repent to the barbecue gods for it later, it'll be okay. But do what you gotta do.